Ron.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Planning and Zoning meeting for tonight, July the 16th, 2015. First order of business tonight will be our public hearings, and our first public hearing will be Fairground Villas, Site Plan 91A. Hamp, you want to introduce that one for us?
Good evening, everyone. First item we have is site plan unit development approval request for the Fairground Villas. This is a plan unit development for a housing, senior housing. On June 18, 2015, a request was filed for a preliminary site plan for plan unit development with senior housing apartments to be located at 608 Fairgrounds Road. Per Appendix A, 1 residential, A household living, 9 plan unit development, additional use permit is required. This site plan approval request has been submitted by the applicant along with the conditional use permit approval request as required per section 405.340 C8. Per the applicant's request, the submittal and/or review of the landscaping plan, lighting plan, and stormwater management plan will be after they receive project approval from the state of Missouri. No on-site land disturbance activity will be performed and/or permitted until the applicant has received approval from the city of Warrenton for the above-mentioned items. And I'd like to ask to make part of the public hearing record the municipal code by reference, plan and zoning report, and the public hearing notices.
Thank you, Mr. Ham.
And the applicant's here if you have any specific questions for us later.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak tonight on the public hearing time for the site plan for the Fairground Villas? Hearing none, we'll close that public hearing and open up the second public hearing, which will be the Fairground Villas conditional use permit.
This is a conditional use permit plan unit development approval request for the Fairground Villas located at 608 Fairgrounds Road. Excuse me. Property is Zone C3 Highway Commercial. Once again, I'd like to ask to make part of the public hearing record the municipal code by reference, the planning and zoning report, and the public hearing notice. On June 18, 2015, a request was filed for conditional use permit approval for a plan unit development with senior citizens apartments to be located at 608 Fairgrounds Road. This conditional use permit application has been filed with a site plan approval request as required per code.
Thank you, Mr. Hemp. Anyone in the audience tonight would like to speak at the public hearing for the Fairground Villas conditional use permit? Hearing none, we'll close our public hearings for this evening and open up our regular business meeting, and that will be started with the minutes from the July the 2nd meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting for July 2nd, 2015 as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Costello, second by Mr. Dickey to approve the minutes as submitted. Any other questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Durbin?
Yes.
Mr. Gerlach is absent. Mr. Costello?
I will abstain. I was absent from that meeting.
Mr. Deach?
Yes.
Mr. Cullum?
Yes.
Mrs. Scott?
I will abstain. I was absent as well.
Mr. Barton?
Yes.
Mr. Schwab?
Yes.
And Mr. Kohler's absent.
Motion passes 6-0 with 2 abstentions and 2 absent. First order of business on the agenda tonight will be the Fairground Villas site plan.
Once again, this was a site plan unit development approval request for Fairground Villas senior citizens apartments to be located at 608 Fairgrounds Road.
If I can interject here, because I did have a conversation with regards to this plan. The part of the reason this is being submitted in front of Planning and Zoning Commission, both the site plan and the conditional use permit, because I think we usually consider them together, is and I just want to bring this to your attention to see how much you guys want to discuss it, is They are seeking a letter from the city in support of the project. Generally speaking, that's where they're at right now, is they need the letter, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, to apply to the state for some type of assistance or funding.
For funding, yes.
Funding to build these senior villas or apartments or whatever they are. When we reviewed the application was it last week, Jack? Or the week before, a couple weeks ago, since this is a planned unit development, there's a significant amount of information that is not in the application that is required under our code for a planned unit development for the conditional use permit. So we were trying to figure out a way that you guys can consider the project, but knowing that they're probably going to have to come back in one way, shape, or form or another to submit this additional information. So what I suggested to the applicant, and what I would suggest tonight, is if you guys are generally in support of the general concept of the project, maybe consider actually not approving it at their request, vote to give a letter of support to the project generally, and then postpone the conditional use permit so they don't have to reapply if they get the funding. But really, so we could get at least a general idea of what the project is, a general idea of the density, and a general idea of kind of the green space and what they intend to do with it. So that's what I talked to them about, and I thought that may be the best solution, because there's just some things that they don't have beyond the landscape plan, such as the indentures, the ownership interest, which is really required for you guys to consider the PUD, especially with some of our recent struggles in some of these multi-unit developments.
So while they're called apartments, I'm assuming that it's submitted as a PUD because they will be owned by the occupants.
We are assuming that, however, we've not received any formal covenants, restrictions, condominium association registrations with the state regarding that. And so what Jack and I talked about was the fact that we really can't present it as a PUD for approval. You have to deny it because that information is not here in front of you. So and I understand the applicant's position is basically we need to find out if we get funding before we move forward with the significant cost layout to do those documents.
So I'd like to ask the applicants then, we would still look at a conditional use permit if we were talking about apartments. But typically in a planned unit development, that is because we're looking at individual owners of the specific units. Is that your intention, is that these specific units will be owned by individuals, or will they be owned by an association? Will they be condominiums?
No, they won't.
Whoever's going to speak, come up to the podium and state your name and for the record, please.
Sure.
Thank you, sweetheart. Just state your name for the record, and then they can hear you in the audience.
Okay. I'm Carla Potts, and I'm with Northeast Community Action Corporation, and we're who are applying for the tax credit funding. These will be apartments, and people will rent them, and they will be owned by NECAC and a partnership. When we bring tax credits in, we'll have some partners who come in with funding. And Pete, if you want to address any of that too. Pete Ramsell is our partner and our investor in this, works with our investor.
Hi, my name is Pete Ramsell. I'm the former executive director of the Missouri Housing Development Commission. The importance of that is the Missouri Housing Development Commission allocates these tax credits. And literally, we as the investor partner sell these credits to Berkshire Hathaway, large corporations, insurance companies, banks, and basically the money that we raise from that goes into the project and basically funds the project. It's a little confusing tonight, and a great explanation, if I may, where we are, because we're not asking for a rezoning or a planned unit development. We know that we will comply. We'll come back to you. We'll do everything that you want us to do. What we need right now to submit this application is a letter of support from the city. So Carla and I were here a couple months ago. We met with the council, told them what we had in mind, that we wanted to build some senior housing, gave them an idea of the size, the shape, how many units and all of that, and basically to be competitive, because it's a very, very competitive process. There'll be 100 applications submitted, only 35 will be funded. We love your community, we love this particular site. I've been doing work with Carla for years and years and years. She's good people. The agency does good work in a number of counties in the area. We think we have a very good chance of getting this project funded. But we won't know. Applications are due at the end of August. We submit those applications in August. In December, we'll find out from the Missouri Housing Development Commission if they're going to allocate the credits to us. At that point, that's when everything is triggered, basically. Engineers, architectural, come back to you all, get approval from you all, do anything and everything that's required to get, if you call the PUD approved, that's at the point. We certainly don't want to do that now because all we're asking for now is basically a show of support, a letter of support. So that's kind of the difference where we are today and where we would be in December, if that helps. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
So I'd like to continue then, and I don't believe you'll be able to answer this, but maybe Mr. Graville will.
Okay.
Because we're talking about apartments, what is it about this development then that dictates that it needs to be a planned unit development as opposed to apartments?
So obviously with the recent change in our ordinances with regards to kind of historically some of the multifamily that were kind of originally brought as these multifamily on single-family lots with, I think, staff's understanding at the time that they were going to be unified ownership under a condominium association or some type of unified ownership under it. The idea was really planned unit development is really the more appropriate function because it is not a subdivision of the property. It really anticipates high-density housing under a planned unit development with common areas for the residents, basically higher density housing with larger common spaces and larger green spaces to be used, which is what this project is. We haven't had a large project like this come in before, but we've never really, and what Jack and I decided was when you really look at it, these type of developments should be coming in as a planned unit development because there's one lot, common ownership and whatnot. So you can approve that ownership and tie that to the conditional use permit to say, this is how it's going to be owned, this is how it's going to be maintained, this is how it's going to be regulated. It puts no restrictions on their ability to sell the unified entity, but it restricts their ability to sell off individual units that may then violate our subdivision code.
Okay.
And that was the main reason, was so that down the road, if something happens, they're not selling off by meets and bounds some ground around one of the buildings or two of the buildings and creating illegal lots again, which we've just tried to resolve.
Right. So, but really, in this instance, individual units will, as I understand it, never be for sale. The entire complex
Might be sold.
may
Yes.
change hands,
That
but
is correct.
the individual units would never be sold to unrelated, separate interests.
There'll be a limited
Correct.
partnership that basically owns the property. If I may, this is the developer, we're the investor, but it's one entity, and our money goes in, it gets built. There's restrictions that MHDC puts on a land use restriction agreement for 15 years plus an additional 15-year extended compliance period. So basically, it's an apartment project, run as an apartment project for approximately 30 years.
And I'm familiar with how the tax credit
Okay.
concept works.
Right.
Several years ago, when Warrenton needed a child care facility, a similar tax credit structure was developed where corporations and interests of that nature could essentially put money into that project and do so at a tax benefit.
Okay.
In keeping with the question of taxation, will this be operated as some type of a tax exempt organization so that it will be exempt from property taxes, or
No. We'll
this
pay
property
tax.
be assessed and taxed like all other commercial property?
That is correct. The
Yes, we will
second.
pay taxes, yes. No, that's fine. No, I was just saying we will pay property taxes.
Okay.
It's a for-profit entity.
Yeah.
Okay.
We happen to have a not-for-profit general partner but it is a for-profit entity, and we will pay taxes.
So there won't be a way to avoid, on whatever assessed valuation exists, avoid paying property tax. And my concern is that, these types of developments are a positive for our community, but they do place some demands on our emergency services, our fire and ambulance. They can place demands, particularly when we're talking about this being targeted towards the senior community. It can place some additional demands on, for instance, our senior center, our senior nutrition center, and that's all okay if it brings with it some way to help pay for those additional demands.
It does.
Yeah, I can tell you that on all of the properties that we own in a partnership, we pay property taxes.
Okay. At the full rate?
At the full rate
Okay.
of what they assess.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think that's a great question, because if you guys have seen in the paper, Bethesda, which is a large, non-for-profit entity, they actually settled with St. Louis County to start paying property taxes on a percentage of property taxes on their property. So I think that is an appropriate question, because that's been a struggle in a lot of those communities for a long time, is they are for profit, do they not pay it? So I think it's a good question to ask.
As I understand it, and I may not understand things completely here, this is for seniors only, correct?
Correct.
And could this be classified in any way as a subsidized living arrangement for seniors, since you're going to the state for money?
May I?
Yes,
Okay.
you may.
There is a tax
Explain
credit.
that to me.
Sure, no, I'd be happy to answer your question. It's basically private equity that comes into a partnership, and that private equity results in us selling a tax credit. That's the only subsidy, so to speak. The residents that actually live there do not receive a rental subsidy. They pay rent.
Are there income restrictions
Yes,
on
yes.
the residents?
Yes, 60% of median income. And that is the only restriction. And that ties back to the program itself, the tax credit
All
program.
right, now explain that 60% of median income.
60% of median income, we could look up the median income from the county and give you exact numbers, but ballpark figures, it's somebody that would make in excess, one person that would make in excess, do you know the number? 23,000, 24,000, in that range.
That's in that range. Yeah.
So you're talking primarily about lower income seniors.
We're
Is that
talking
correct?
about any senior person that would make more than that wouldn't be eligible. Any senior person that would make less than that would be eligible, yes.
Okay, all right. Are you, and you probably may not be able to answer this, are you primarily looking at residents within this county? Or are
Absolutely.
you looking at residents from outside the county?
No, we're going to serve the residents in your county, your community.
Right. And when we're approved and we get closer, once we start building, we'll start taking applications for the program, and we'll take applications right here in Warrenton.
All right. And NECAC will operate and manage this facility?
NECAP will manage the facility, and NECAP will be a partner with our investor we're the developer.
So the
And-
upkeep of the facility will be NECAC's responsibility?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if I may, I'm going to put back on my old hat as Executive Director of the Missouri Housing Development Commission. We watch very carefully annual audits, annual inspections. They report to us. They provide audited statements to us. We approve operating budgets. And that was always my hammer. They do a good job, they get another project. They do a bad job, they don't get another project. And it was a huge hammer. Whether it's a not-for-profit developer or a for-profit developer, that was my hammer. And everybody knew, you do it right. We want the community to be happy. There's 4 statewide elected officials on this commission. We want to make sure you're happy and they're happy at all times.
Yeah, I'm not so much concerned about them as I am about the community.
Well, I guarantee you, they're not happy if you call them. And that was always what we were trying to avoid.
NECAC also has board members from Warren County.
Right.
Yes, I know
We
that.
have 3 board members from Warren County, and I can tell you, we take a great deal of pride in our properties, and we do everything we can to make them show places. We make them where anyone would want to live there, and something we're very proud of, because that's our name, too. So we make them places that people enjoy living, and the community is happy to have in their community.
Thank you.
If I might ask, 51 weeks out of the year, the area that you're talking about is just like it is today. But during the week of the Warren County Fair, the traffic is much higher, the activity level is much higher, and
The noise level is much higher.
the noise level is going to be much higher. And so I'm sure you're aware of that and recognize that. The only concern I would bring up regarding that is that for that week, the hours of operation run up to about midnight. So in addition to the lights being on and the noise, as Mr. Deach mentioned, typically a fireworks display on one of those nights. There are motorsports and tractor pulls and things of that nature. Do you foresee that in any way being counterproductive to the happy existence of your residents there?
I think they'll love it, and I mean that sincerely. Most of the people, the tenants, I'm going to give you just a little perspective on what we typically see as a tenant. They're 65 to 85 years old. 80%, maybe 90% are going to be women. And any activity, anything going on, they're at that stage in life, it's kind of neat, and they'll probably enjoy it. But that's a perfect site for this development. Not only for the community, but for the residents that live there. It really is.
One way of advertising it, they get free fireworks once a year.
There you
We may
go.
try that.
There you go.
But,
We'll put that on our flyer.
The services that are right there, the emergency services, the fire department, I mean, it's a great story to tell. It's a great marketing perspective.
Do you have any other facilities in Warren County currently?
We do. We have Donna Marie Apartments, which is just barely inside the city limits, but it's on Highway 47, and that's a family apartment. And then we have apartments in Wright City Apartments. And senior apartments, our closest one is Lincoln Villa in Troy. That would be our closest senior. But yes, we do have some apartments.
For this being senior apartments, has there ever been or a chance that you could foresee it being an assisted living area where you would have the possibility that someone could come in and they would have nursing? I'm just thinking about assisted living has more risks than just senior living.
The typical tax credit project, well, one, by code, by law, Section 42 of the IRS code is basically what governs the tax credit program. We cannot do assisted living, but Carla and I have been doing this for a while, and so we really work towards people aging in place. It's very, very important, very significant. Personally, I can tell you I've had my parents in these facilities. I'll do anything to help an elderly person age in place, stay there. So home health, we have a lot of home health providers, that especially that population that gets to be 80 and 85 years old. But it's all about letting them age in place and having a decent place, a place they can call their own. So this is very significant for us, and something that we encourage, and we really fight to maintain that aspect of life. I always try not to go the next step, and I have to really fight myself. I didn't want my parents in a nursing home. And I don't know, those of you are shaking your heads, you've had that experience. I'll do anything to keep my parents, your parents, anybody out of that situation. If we can help them live and stay and age in place, that's what this is all about.
Thank you.
So I guess the question I would have, the statement of support that we could recommend that ultimately then the Board of Aldermen would have to, I think, ratify and.
I think you guys, I
Forward.
looked at the statute, and I think you guys generally have the authority to issue a letter of support for the project. I don't know that you have to issue a recommendation. I think you guys have the discretion to say, hey, we want to recommend a letter of support based on a review of the documents, or you guys can say, you know, planning and zoning has done an initial review, the project will need a conditional use permit and a site plan. However, you know, the Planning and Zoning Commission of the City of Warrenton is in support, and that will be okay, right?
That will be okay, and will that then allow the mayor to do one too, and the?
Well, and that's a great question. I'm glad we brought that up. If you want it to be from the mayor and board, because we were just trying to find the most expeditious way to get you a letter of support, because I know time is of the essence,
Yes.
then what we would do is, we would not need a second public hearing for the board. They could recommend a letter of support, and then we could have that on next Tuesday's agenda, probably without any issues, don't you think, Melanie?
They're scheduled for August 4th, I think.
Well, but that's with a public hearing. They don't need a public hearing.
If they're asking for a letter of support.
They can just go on the agenda next Tuesday. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, we
That'd
could
be
do
even
that.
faster.
We could probably just cancel that public hearing for August 4th. We could get, they could make a recommendation tonight, and the board could make a decision on it next Tuesday.
Okay.
And that is
Thank you.
specific to MHDC's requirements that ask Carl as a
If-
developer to get a letter from the chief elected official.
Yeah, that's not a problem, and if you can give us a sample of what you want,
Sure.
we can even take a look at it and make sure, because I want to make sure we say it will require a conditional use and a site plan approval. However, the initial review, the city is in support of this project if they recommend that.
I can email the letter that we use to
You
you.
can send it to Jack, yeah.
To email it to Jack, okay.
I have one further question for you. What kind of restrictions or regulations or clarifications do you have with regard to a grandparent raising children, grandchildren?
You want to take it?
Sure.
Okay.
They're just simply not allowed.
So you
They
would
can
not
visit,
allow...
they can stay overnight, they could probably stay while their mom and dad's on vacation, but they are not allowed to move in and live there. Have to be 55 or older.
All right, thank you.
And I think, Mr. Deach, that's part of the reason why we kind of thought about, let's do the letter, because we don't have those restrictions and ownership documents to really kind of get into how they're going to restrict it, what mechanisms they're going to have in place. But I think that's part of the letter of support, is being able to ask those questions here tonight.
So.
And that's actually part of, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead.
but that's actually part of a recorded document where people under that age cannot live there. It's very official.
So is the appropriate course of action in what we're talking about tonight then to table the site plan, table the conditional use permit, and separately vote on a motion of support for a letter of support for NECAC's development of this
Yes,
project?
except for one correction from the city clerk, that she was correct about, that it should be not to table, but to postpone.
All right.
That would be the
That's
proper.
on tape.
It's not table, it's postponed, but she's
All
right
right.
about the proper procedural thing. That's what I said was table, she said.
Would a
Postpone.
single motion for all
Yes,
three of those
absolutely.
things be appropriate?
That would be appropriate.
Then I will make a motion that we postpone consideration of the site plan and the conditional use permit, and recommend that the Board of Aldermen and Mayor issue a letter of support for the project with BCAC for Fairground Villas.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Costello, second by Mr. Cullum, to postpone the site plan and conditional use permit in place of a letter of support for the project of NECAC planned unit development. Any other questions or comments at this time? Roll call vote.
Mr. Deach?
There's a question up there before I vote.
Do I need to go to the podium?
Yeah. You- You should have spoke during the open here, but we'll let you ask. Go
I
ahead.
apologize.
That's
What-
fine. That's what the public hearing was for, but go ahead if you
I
have a question.
apologize,
That's
I missed that.
That's fine.
My name is Carrie Benny, and I know that there are a couple neighbors here. We are the closest home to the property that you're speaking about, but I know that I spoke to, by email, text, or phone, at least half of the neighbors, and I will tell you that I didn't get one positive vote. There are two people, Fred Flake is one, who is on vacation and was unable to come, did not have opportunity to change that this late in the game from when we got the letter. One of our biggest concerns probably is property value. We would like to know, what are the statistics? Do we have record? How have NECAC low-income senior housing apartments affected the property values of those that are close in communities that you've done?
You want to talk about property value? You want me to?
That was during the public hearing, but we'll take that into consideration, and at the next meeting, make sure that you're here, and we'll address those situations.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is, and I just want to make a general comment as we move forward with this, is that the city as a government entity has to provide fair housing opportunities for low, moderate income. There are some considerations with regards to property values, and I think what is fortunate for us, fortuitous for us, is that this is a project that is not even under consideration for approval right now. And so what I would recommend is, you're going to have some questions that are probably very simple answers from them, but probably some questions that may take some more complexity and some time for you to maybe work with them and address them, is that because they're just giving a letter of support for it generally in the community, this project, without approving anything. There is no approval of this project
That's what I
tonight.
understood.
Absolutely. And that's, and I think it is confusing because you're out there and you're like, it's getting approved tonight, it's not getting approved tonight. That's not what's happening. But I would highly, really encourage you to speak with them, and maybe you guys can even hold a forum in the neighborhood to answer some of these questions, because this, the city, to a certain extent, has very, we have to provide fair housing opportunities. We're required by federal and state law. The property value is a question that I think they could probably address directly. You guys can research directly, so that when we come, if they do get the funding for an approval for a conditional use permit or a site plan, you guys can kind of determine whether or not there is a net negative effect, or maybe even a positive effect or no effect at all, but communicating with them, because I think there probably are going to be secondary issues as well: traffic, lighting, noise. It's always a concern with regards to parking when you have home health care work. Drainage,
We have
obviously.
issues coming across already.
No doubt about it. They will have to address, and I think if you have issues right now, this is an opportunity to address those issues in the drainage so I would recommend, to the extent you can, talk to the developer, work directly with him, because how far out would we be before you guys would come back on this conditional use? 6 months, January?
At least 6 months,
Yeah,
yes.
and I'm sure you guys want to be good neighbors, and if there's a drainage issue and you can take that into account in your grading or your stormwater, because sometimes with the stormwater, we don't know. The engineer does the calculations, and it's raw land, and we're not aware of existing stormwater issues. If you can work with them, they may be able to satisfy some of those things, say, hey, no problem. We'll kind of do our detention over here, we'll do this over here and whatnot. So that's what I would recommend is talk directly with them. And then to the extent those issues still remain, when the project comes back, we're going to re-advertise it. We're going to make the property be posted again, and you're going to get another letter. So you're going to be aware of when the development is actually, the development itself is being reviewed by the board to really address some of those additional issues.
From what I understand, I think from those that I spoke to, we were the only ones who had received a letter. Everyone else just saw the signs that were posted.
They may not be within the
within
range.
300 feet.
Yeah, they may not be within the 300 feet, and that's all we can, there's a City of Louisiana case out of the state of Missouri that says we can't require that to go beyond that.
My biggest concerns, and I get that, are that we have, by majority, an elderly community already. And a lot of people, including a gentleman in the back, is, and those that are, not here tonight, live alone. They don't understand. They have many questions, and they feel very left out, and don't get out to even drive by to see that there was a meeting tonight. So there are some big concerns. I feel, sort of responsible in that I didn't plan on being the one to talk tonight, but it would be good to have a forum.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it would be good to make sure that you talk to more of them.
Anytime we have a the problem, ultimately the problem we have as a city is that there are restrictions on what we can require by statute a developer. For example, we can't require, we tried to do this in the past. There was a multifamily development called Stoneview where they wanted to change the ordinance to say, we're going to send notice to everybody within 1,000 feet. Well, there's case law in Missouri that says that goes beyond what the statute requires. You can't make a developer do that. So what I think is very, like I said, fortuitous in this situation is we're 6 months away from even this being considered by Planning and Zoning and
Sure.
the Board of Aldermen. And like I said, I absolutely understand your concern. Whether it's NECAC or apartments or whatever it is, it's a high-density development in what is typically a single-family residential area. And that's always a concern, because are they going to be, compatible with each other? I think there's a lot of things, if you are you've become the representative of the group, whether you like it or not, I encourage you guys to sit down and have a public forum between you guys as neighbors and see what issues are really there, talk about it, try to address some of those stormwater issues or whatnot, because, like I said, we have to have an equal housing opportunity. But I think a lot of this stuff can kind of be addressed. You say, hey, there's a funky curve here, or can you have all the home health care workers park over here? Or, I've even seen in these type of situations a specific location where workers on site can smoke, so they're not in a backyard where a neighboring kid would, come into contact. A lot of that stuff, because the beauty of it is it can be kind of worked out in the drawing phases and the planning phases, which I'm sure you guys are more than willing to sit down and say, hey, we want to be good neighbors. And like I said, like the stormwater at this point, there's a great opportunity to probably address on a better basis than what you have right now.
And we'd be more than happy to do that. I'll give you my card, and certainly schedule something. Our architect is here. We'll come and sit down and talk. We want to be good neighbors.
Thank you very much.
With all due respect to Mr. Costello, we are big fair supporters, but I will say that fairground is hopping way more than just 1 week of the year. There are other events, from the band doing a mud run to another, demo derby.
The way it is set up, they could have something every weekend. And I think
the fire department does training sessions that go all
people-
through the night with big lights, and
The people that
big
live out there
setups.
know who their neighbor are. They
so
have a land use.
there are a lot
zoning
more
use,
than
yeah.
1 week.
Right.
No offense to you.
The helicopter taking off,
Correct. I mean, it'll shake the house.
they'll get all kind of
So,
entertainment.
it is. So, well, thank you. I apologize
then-
for missing.
No, that's
that
fine.
opportunity.
I'd recommend, before you guys leave, if you guys can exchange information and then
Sure.
try to set something up, so, when we get down to it, hopefully they can incorporate in their renditions or their architecture drawings or their, whatever the concerns are, maybe even do a site visit or do it on site, and I think it would be very helpful.
And at what point do you, if they come back with their funding in 6 months, then they come to ask for approval, correct?
They'll have to submit documents that were related to ownership. They'll have to probably, and there'll be a consideration with regards to the drawings. I'm sure there'll be some discussions with you guys and more, concrete type drawings. And they may say, well, this is too dense. We want you to, but you're going to have an opportunity at the public hearings to have input on that. So
Okay.
it will have to come back
Thank
here
you.
with drawings and everything presented as a packet. And, I think if we kind of all work together, we can see if it's a workable project.
Okay. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you. So we have a motion by Mr. Costello, second by Mr. Cullum, to postpone this and offer a letter of support for the project to move forward for the funding, and then we'll address that when it comes back in front of us again. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Roll call vote.
Mr. Deitch?
I will vote yes for the letter of support and to postpone it, but my yes vote at this point in time does not mean necessarily that I will vote in favor of the project when a site plan is developed.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mrs. Scott?
I think I probably need to abstain. This is a question. My daughter-in-law's on the NECAC board, so.
I mean, that's pretty remote. I think you probably, they're gonna be ownership. You said you're.
Well, NECAC doesn't, I don't know that, I mean, I'll just abstain and then we'll clarify this before we
Yeah,
come to the next one.
that's fine.
That just kind of jumped in my head there.
Mr. Barton?
Yes.
Mr. Schwab?
Yes.
Mr. Kohler is absent, sorry. Mr. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Durbin?
Yes.
Mr. Costello?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0 with 1 abstention and 2 absent. So that's it for those, all of those together,
I believe so, and this
And
will
we'll
be
just-
presented to the board
right?
next
And-
Tuesday on the 21st.
Yes, for the letter,
Right.
and then we'll
And
cancel
then-
the public hearing for the.
It's already in the paper today.
I know, but we'll show that it's canceled.
And then,
That's it.
then we won't table this month to month like we just.
No, because-
It'll come back in front of us
Mel
like a
will
brand
get
new
the
thing
answer.
eventually. So we'll close the meeting at this time and offer, Mr. Hampton, do you have any comments? I know we
On
have
the,
something on August 4th.
on the August 4th, there will be a pole sign variance request, approval request, and some activity out at the fairgrounds. A couple special permit for the fairgrounds.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Good for the group? Hearing none, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thanks for coming out for the special meeting. Good night.